I thought I was watching a farming live stream, and here's some clown sitting in a truck. This does not look like small farming. Where are the pigs? Reasonable questions, and let me address that. I am a first generation farmer who also works a full time job, and I am on my lunch break, which kind of fell a little bit later this afternoon. I work at a hospital as a nurse and diabetes educator, actually. And health is one of the things that got me into farming, but I'll talk about that in a little bit. But first, if you're new here, I am Stephen Reichert, and this is the Rowan Ridge Farm YouTube channel, and we are raising heritage hogs on pasture and breeding them. And if you haven't subscribed already, I would love to have you join our channel and follow what we are doing because we are on a mission to make America farmers again while we make pork better, one breeding at a time. And I've been working on a video series over the last couple of weeks on breeding pigs because I feel like this is an area that could use a little bit more coverage. And so I figured, why not see if I can put some of my time and effort into trying to clarify and answer some questions that I get? Because one of the things that I do is I sell breeding stock to folks locally, other homesteaders and small farmers who decide that they want to go from having a couple of feeder pigs to put in their own freezer in the fall up here in New Hampshire, just for reference for those of you who haven't looked closely at the channel logo. Up in New England, and a lot of folks raise their pigs from spring through the fall. And that first step of just putting pork in your own freezer and then taking a break for the winter, it's kind of where a lot of folks start out. And then sometimes after building a relationship with people, selling them feeder piglets, they say, how can I eliminate the middleman? Maybe go a little bit bigger, buy some breeding stock, start keeping my pigs year round, breeding and selling some, and then keeping some for my own and my own family's use. And so we have been doing that relatively successfully. But we're starting small, and that's one of the reasons why you are watching a farming channel where I am talking to you from a hospital. Hello, anime nerdy boy. Good to see you here. I am happy to discuss anything. You're new to the country, says edits country edits. Sorry, new here. Tell me why I should subscribe. What do you do on here? So we are raising heritage hogs on pasture. I'm a first generation farmer. Haven't been doing this all my life. Didn't inherit a mega farm with everything set up. Just started this about 4 years ago and kind of building it from the ground up from scratch. We're breeding heritage hogs on pasture, doing things the old fashioned way, building better pork, better bacon. And my goal is to try to encourage other people to become farmers and to get involved with farming because not everybody has to be chasing hogs around every day, at dinner time. But the more people who are involved more closely with the way that we produce food is really important. And that's awesome that you live on a farm and you have goats and chickens. I have to say, I have a couple of chickens. Most of my chickens have died. And one of the mistakes I will say, um, Chance, hello to you too. Is that a Ukrainian flag? Uh, One of the things that I did when I started out, because I figured that chickens are easy. I'm just gonna have a bunch of chickens, throw them in there with the pigs. I read a couple Joel Salatin books, and I figured, I'd be good to go. Kind of the diversity of the different species there working together. But what I found is that I have a neighbor on one side of me, and my neighbor, oddly enough, I'm in rural New Hampshire, and my neighbor is a gun nut. He's, very country, and yet he hates chickens, and he gets really wrapped around the axle when they come over the fence line and they defecate on his property. And so it created a lot of beef between me and my neighbor. So I just kind of stopped with the chickens, and the foxes just kind of removed them. I actually tried getting some new chickens this spring that I was going to fence in a little bit better. And then I think a fisher cat or a weasel or something got in there. I will be happy to tell you how I hate chickens because at the end of the day, chickens are a pain in the ass to manage. And when you have a larger animal, and there's pros and cons to every type of animal, I'm just very upfront about my personal persuasion as far as chickens go. I'm upfront about my biases. With chickens, you have a whole bunch of them, and they're really dumb, and you can't incentivize. Oh, okay, fair enough. So you weren't actually talking about me, talking about my neighbor. That's a great question. I don't think he uses YouTube too much, otherwise, he might be able to weigh in. And I always tell him, because I moved to New Hampshire from upstate New York, and I was like, "Man, of all the people in New York that you got moving next door to you when you're like a crazy gun nut, you could have gotten much worse New Yorkers moving next to you than New Yorkers who have chickens and pigs running around their yard and who are all about shooting and all the rest of that stuff." And um, so that's 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 kind of what we've been doing. Okay, a couple questions coming in here. Why are you at work? What makes you better? Okay, Phase, I'll tell you why I'm at work. I am a first generation farmer. I did not inherit this farm that I have. And so, in order to support my family and pay for the farm that I'm living on, instead of taking out massive bank loans, for equipment and trying to make money off the farm directly immediately, I work as a nurse educator at the hospital here locally, and that helps me pay the bills. Also gives me a little bit of diversity in what I'm doing, because if I am just trying to make money off of one thing, and I see this all the time in my community, there are people that farm full time, and when something goes wrong, they have a rough spring and maybe an animal dies, or the price of the products that they're selling goes down, there's not enough rain, and so they're not getting the crops that they want, they get desperate and it gets ugly. But when you have an off farm job, it gives you the ability to have a little bit more um, freedom to move within the system, where you're not desperate for income all the time, because you have an underlying, you're basically bankrolling your own operation rather than having to hope that everything goes to plan. Now, at some point, I would love to be able to make an income off of farming, and that is ultimately the goal. But I've seen too many situations where people try to get there too fast, and then they wind up killing the dream. I did a video on burnout. I think I linked it in the description to this. A video on burnout, and burnout absolutely happens when you try to go too big too fast. And I think that's a natural part of things. Like, it's natural to want to push and go harder. And then as you do that, you start to realize that you can only go so big so fast before it starts to get to be too much. And then you have to protect the love that you have for what you're doing so that it doesn't get completely wiped out. And diversifying your sources of income and having an off farm job to facilitate that has been an effective thing for me. Dionysus says, switch it up, work for 3 years, and import some Calabrian uh, pigs and start making American. And I'm not sure if I'm reading all that right. Country edits. Yes, my neighbor is old. He's not that old. I mean, he's like, my dad is older, but, like, even he's like, if you ever watch Dennis the Menace, he's like, Dennis's Mr. Wilson's character, only much angrier, and he uses a lot more curse words, and he just gets really bent out of shape really easily, and he flips out, and the chickens were kind of provoking that, so I just let the chickens go. I actually did try goats a little bit, but, I mean, all this to because my story about chickens and goats is probably not as relevant or as interesting as the fact that, um, being able to focus on one thing is something that I think a lot of small farmers and homesteaders could stand to do better. And it's really easy when you're homesteading to want to wear a whole bunch of hats, because I'm a farmer now, I'm living off the land, I'm kind of my own man, I'm doing everything by myself, and you want to take on as much of the production of every single thing on your farm as possible. And it's real easy to get sucked into a point where burnout is going to be inevitable when you're using that mindset and you're working that way. Whereas if you can focus on one thing and really get that dialed in and have that nicely buttoned up, then you can build other things on there as you go along. And that's kind of been my plan with what I'm doing. with the pigs because I'm not averse to the idea of getting chickens and fencing them in differently. It's just that when I got started with pigs, my focus was very much on like, here's a big, strong, powerful animal that can go and cause thousands of dollars worth of damage in my neighborhood if I don't contain these animals, keep them squared away and well behaved. So all of my effort went into electric fencing, making sure that I had physical barriers behind that, and really making sure that I didn't get any calls from my neighbors saying, "Hey, like my lawn looks like a moonscape and your pigs are running around my yard having a frolic. Who's going to pay for replacing the sod?" I didn't want to find myself in that situation. And so I kind of overlooked chickens because, well, chickens are little. What are they going to do? They crap on stuff, but that's not that big of a deal, I thought. And I found out that my neighbor actually doesn't see it that way. He doesn't share my perspective. And so here we are. So, one of many reasons why I kind of why chickens have fallen out of favor with what I am doing here. I actually did have goats as well, and my thought when I got the goats originally was to try to use them to knock down some brush, and then use the goats to to produce some milk, and that the milk would be sort of a freebie if I'm feeding the goats mostly on brush and other kinds of available forage. I would use the goats to create milk for the pigs and then keep the pigs growing that way. And so, always looking to find a way to get some forage and some feed for the main money animals that are on the farm. And for me, that has been pigs. Dionysus said, switch it up, work for 3 years, and then get some pigs and kind of focus on that. I'm not sure if I'm completely capturing the intention of what was said in that comment, but generally, I would say I agree with that idea of trying to switch things up and take turns. I switch up a little bit more on a short term basis because I work at the hospital 3 days in a row, and then I'm off for 4 days. So this gives me a little bit more time to devote to my family and to the farm. And one of the things that I think is really easy to overlook when we talk about farming, and a lot of YouTube channels make a lot of, hay off of the idea of, the tips and tricks and hacks and systems. But at the end of the day, a lot of the importance of what we're doing on a farm is about family and community because you really start to learn who your neighbors are and the people you can rely on when you have a farm, because these are the people that are going to come help you get your animals back in when they break out in the middle of the night, or when you have, some kind of a crisis going on, one of your animals dies and you don't have the, backhoe to dig a hole to be able to put it in the ground, or you need a hay bale move that your tractor can't lift, or you're selling your meat and you're going to try to find people that want to buy it and support that local agriculture, and remember the old ways. And then a big part of community is family, and you can't really fit into a community well if you're neglecting your family, and, like, your wife and kids hate you, which, love you, sweetheart. Hopefully, hopefully this is not making me persona non grata. But I can tell you that if, when the farm goes well and it's relatively low maintenance at various points, that always is nice. And the farming experience is something that, the wife and kids enjoy and they participate in, and it's something that we do together, and it's great, and the kids get a kick out of it too. They love helping me feed the animals. But I can also tell you that when it's cold outside and I get home from work late, and at 9 o'clock at night the little ones need to go to sleep, and I can't take them out with me to feed, and they don't understand why they can't come out, and I have to get changed into overalls when I get home from work, and it's like this whole big process just to be able to make it out to the barn. Well, that takes a toll, and you have to be mindful of the other passengers on the vessel. And so it's always something that, as excited as I am about farming, I am also cautious, because I know that my natural tendency is to say, "Oh, I got more money. I got more room. I have enough to buy those pigs. Yeah, let's buy a couple extra pigs. Hell, let's buy 4 extra pigs. Why not 5 or 6, Why not? Oh, I want one of those. I wanna try that." And you wanna try everything, and that's all well and good until all those animals are too big, and then it turns into a problem, and then you have personal problems that are kind of embroiled in everything going on with the animals and being too busy. And then you have to kind of pull the ripcord because you grew too big too quickly instead of growing a little bit at a time, assessing that progress and saying better or worse. And, taking the time to really make that a collaborative process so that you don't get lulled into a situation where you only see the good no matter how awful things are because you've put so much into it that you can't afford to let it go. But where somebody else who maybe has a different perspective and isn't as close to it, they can see it and they can give you feedback and say, hey, like, this is working, this is worth it, put the hammer down, go for it. Or they can say, you know what, game off, I'm out. Because at the end of the day, I really enjoy what I'm doing here on YouTube. I enjoy my animals and being able to raise my own food. I enjoy the community that I get to be part of here in Southern New Hampshire, through the farming that I'm doing, and I enjoy having something that allows me to pursue excellence. In the same way that when I used to climb mountains, that was an opportunity to pursue excellence. And in my work that I do in the hospital, I try to pursue excellence. And farming is just another outlet to be able to work hard and to make something beautiful out of that effort. But end of the day, I would much rather have, my family than a bunch of pigs. And, I would much rather eat Smithfield pork with my family and, have that to show for my efforts rather than having a whole bunch of hogs that love me and nobody surrounding me in terms of a family. And so, not to say that, Smithfield pork is good or viable and that people should consume it, but just to outline my list of priorities and what I've learned through the process of doing all this stuff, that you know, there's a lot of decisions to make, and you have to make decisions very rapidly sometimes that are going to impact you into the long term and that you can't go back from. I'm working on a video right now in the breeding series talking about the hardest part of breeding pigs being the culling process. And I think that this is really what separates the men from the boys when we're talking about breeding hogs, is that, you know, in this series, I'm kind of moving from the more introductory, basic logistical, mechanical, biological processes and needs that go along with a male and female pig getting together and producing viable offspring. And that's kind of like step one. But really becoming a breeder means improving the breed and improving pork overall, not only within your own herd, but also within your marketplace, within your community, and in the broader market. And what this requires careful attention being paid to selecting the genetics of who gets to breed and then culling everybody who doesn't. And approaching that point is difficult because a lot of times you put money, you put time into these animals. And looking at like a breeder boar, for example, you put 4 to 6 months into them to get them big enough to where they're able to start breeding. And then you need another 3 months and change from there until they're actually able to produce some offspring. And it's hard not to carry that cost that you've put into this animal up to the point where you have to make a decision now and say, okay, do I stay or do I, send him to sausage? And you have to make that decision sometimes relatively quickly, comparatively, because you don't have, forever to make that decision because there's a new animal that you have an opportunity to buy him. Once you buy that other animal, it's going to crowd out. There's not maybe enough females to go around. And so you have to make that decision and you don't know for sure what's going to happen. And so you have to be decisive, but not hasty. And that's something that I'm still learning to do, and I'm trying to learn how to do it better. And the only way to do that better is to practice it and culling animals saying, "Hey, look, you know what? 3 strikes and you're out." That's a tough thing to do because you get time and money into these animals, some of which I've had, I have a couple of sows that I've had literally from the beginning of my farm in 2021 when I started breeding right out of the gate, one of my first 4 pigs that I ever bought, and she's a great pig, she's super sweet, she's big and fat, and she's a good mama. She's always done really well, but she's fat and she's not necessarily the most prolific breeder. She can, she can squeeze out 1 or maybe 2 litters a year, and she's overweight and her genetics are nothing special, but I keep her because she's got a soft spot in my heart. And I recognize that ultimately that type of relationship with your animals is indicative of a weakness that will cost you as a farmer, but at the same time, I'm looking at what I need to do to be able to take the next step to escalate what I'm doing to the next level. And that requires me to be honest with myself about what it is that I'm doing this for, and then make the decisions to say the animals that produce the best, the animals that exhibit the best genetic phenotypes, those are the ones that are going to go forward. And the ones that do not fulfill that purpose, they have a great life until the point that they become sausage, and that's a tough decision to make, and I mean, it's a decision that has been on my mind for probably a year and a half at least, since it's been about a year and a half since she has kind of been, not super productive, but I've kept her because even though I know that that's a decision that I need to make, I'm not ready to pull the trigger figuratively and literally on that, and so I'm sitting here kinda waiting for things to come full circle and just kinda, dragging my feet, kicking the can down the road, and at the end of the day, probably wasting some money on feed. And the more ruthless you can be in the process of culling, the better the results, the more unique and the more desirable your animals are going to be that you get out of your breeding herd. So, that's kinda my experience and my thought process there with the culling, and I've got a full video actually that I'm working on, kind of detailing about 5 different levels that I assess my breeding animals on in order to say, are they, keepers, or are we putting them in the freezer? And where you can look at that and at least have a clear answer and not have to guess and wonder and say, is this the right move or not? It may be the hard decision to make, but at least it's the right decision, and that as hard as that decision is, you know that it's the right decision, and ultimately it's gonna take you where you need to be down the road. And in the long term, you're gonna look back and say, why didn't I do that sooner? Because this emotional attachment to keeping an animal who wasn't benefiting the herd and benefiting me financially, and ultimately was kind of holding me back. And there are log jams like that, blind spots that we have in everything that we do, but farming specifically. And something I've been thinking about here as we've been going through the process of looking at new breeding stock coming into the herd this fall, and looking at some different things that I want to do genetic, ways that I'm hoping to improve my herd this coming year, throughout 2025 and then into 2026. So, well, folks, I want to thank you for taking the time to watch. Please subscribe to the Rowan Ridge Farm YouTube channel. Watch some of the videos that I got down below. Let's have this conversation about farming pigs and what we're doing to be more self-sufficient and more self-reliant within our food system. Subscribing to the channel lets me know that you're on board and that what I'm doing is hitting the target. And I would love to have, that feedback so that we can continue this together. As I mentioned, I have the playlist for my series on breeding linked down below in the description. I look forward to seeing you guys on the next video. And every Wednesday, I'm doing this live stream. Probably should have said this before I started my outro. Every Wednesday, I am doing a live stream on my lunch break so that I can take a little time to kind of catch up with you guys and have a little bit of, call it, conversation in between uploads. So, kind of kick around stuff and ask questions and check in with you guys and tell you what I am doing, and hear from you what you're doing. And I really like to get questions because that helps me focus the direction that my content will take to be able to address the things that are going on in your life and on your farm and with your animals that you are doing, because farming is a overall kind of a lonely pursuit. It's not something where you have people on the sidelines cheering you on, and even the people who are on social media who are, cheerleading for you a little bit, at the end of the day, you're the one out there in the barn, in the field, working with the animals and doing all that stuff, and it gets lonely. So being able to have an outlet where we can commiserate, share, discuss this stuff, and normalize it, frankly, so that we can make America farmers again. And that's why that is the tagline for my farm, because well, there's a lot of problems in society right now. Things are crazy. There's political upheaval and unrest. Hey, Caden. And I believe that if you really get right down to it, farming ultimately addresses and solves, or can work to solve, all of the problems that are kind of popping off right now in society. Because when people are busy and are well nourished and have a sense of purpose and an idea how life actually works, which is something that that goes on, when you're working on a farm, everybody winds up being better off. And I actually want to talk about that more in future videos. Caden, can I get a shout out? My house burned down. Caden, I am sorry to hear that your house burned down. Here's a shout out for Caden. Uh, I have, well, I don't know, buddy. You might have come to the wrong channel if you want much out of a shout out, because there's 3 people watching the stream. I'm pretty sure one of them is my wife. Although, I mean, hey, any little bit we can do to help. But my channel is, we're trying to figure things out here, honestly. I had one video where I was talking about how small farmers are having a hard time, and there she is. There's the love of my life, Myra, my beautiful wife. We got 4 people watching the stream. That's fantastic. That's like 4 more than I had about a minute ago. And so we had a lot of people subscribe to the channel after my video about how the USDA is screwing small farmers through all their overregulation of foods, because Smithfield Pork has all of the money and the process to deal with regulation, so it doesn't slow them down. But a small farmer like myself has a really hard time making anything stick, because I can't generate the numbers because it costs too much because of the USDA. Long story, but that video just blew up out of nowhere. I got a lot of subscribers to the channel, and now I'm like, well, what is it exactly that people want to hear about? Because all the videos that I put out where I'm actually giving useful information about breeding pigs, about, marketing farm products and pork, and trying to make the finances work, and like anything like that, I get like 75, 80 views, and I'm putting in a lot of time on these videos, and it's not really doing much. Which, at the end of the day, that's kind of okay, because I'm not, I understand this is a long game that we're playing here. It's not like this is something where pig farming is not something that goes viral overnight, let's say. And I'm aware and okay with that. And I know that part of it too, which is one of the reasons why I'm doing a video series on breeding, is that, like, you have to build up a library of content before YouTube is gonna start pushing it out there, and where people are gonna really start watching, and there's, like, more depth. It's not just like, "Oh, you had one great video," and then everybody's like, okay," and we're waiting for the next one. But if you have a library of content out there, there's more depth to what you're doing, both on a personal level and also in terms of the algorithm. So I can't get too butthurt about that. But that's one of the reasons why I like these live streams, because conversations and interactions here help me to understand a little bit more about what my audience and what you guys are looking for. And it is about 115 degrees in this truck. Oddly enough, I know New England is not a place that is known for being incredibly hot, but right now I am roasting. And so I want to ask you once again, if you have not already, please subscribe to this YouTube channel. Every Wednesday, I'm doing live streams right here from work. And then I'm doing uploads every Monday. And I put shorts up there as well, but I'm going to start trying to batch a bunch of longer videos, do a little bit less editing, not make them so fancy, and just kind of get them get them out there so that we can get more of this info out to you guys. So I appreciate you guys taking the time to tune in. We will see you on my next Wednesday lunch break live stream. And until then, let's make America farmers again. Later on, guys.